There you go.
All right. I'm going to see if I can interrupt all the conversations at once.
No, unsuccessful.
A little bit.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me in the back?
No.
What about out in the hall? Can you guys hear me out there? Hey, Patrick. You can hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Good.
Can you give us like a last year?
Let's go into the...
Last
Oh, awesome. So we have an incredible audio-video kind of setup. We've got a second mic even now for the live feed. So a few announcements before we kick things off. Our schedule format. I bribe people with pizza to not sit in traffic. So you can show up here as early as 5, from 5 until 6:30. We're working on getting everything set up here. We've got the space already available. If you want to be a pro about it, the ground floor is walk-in co-working. So instead of sitting at your office working on your laptop, you can sit in the co-working space working on your laptop, and then avoid sitting in traffic on your way over here, and instead come join us, do a little networking, have some pizza, and already be here while everybody else is sitting in traffic. I don't know if you've caught on, I hate sitting in traffic. It's kind of a theme here. At 6:30, we kick off the actual meeting, which is what we're doing now with the announcements. And then at 8, I chase everybody out of here, but you don't necessarily have to go home. There's usually a small contingency of us that goes over to Rookies. It's a place right around the corner. Have a couple drinks, socialize, and the liberal exchange of business cards often happens over there. Something I like to do to seed the networking a little bit is to ask, first off, who here is currently looking for some sort of a job in the marketing world? We've got at least one person, 2 people, we've got a couple hands up. And who here knows about some sort of a job that is available in the marketing world, maybe at your own company that you're hiring for, or maybe you know somebody that's hiring? I saw one hand go up for a moment. All right. Make sure everybody can see around. 2 hands. So we got a couple of folks that know about some jobs, and we got a couple folks that are looking for jobs. So that should help you with networking. Those are the people you want to talk to. All right. And I want to make sure that we thank our sponsors, who are the folks that help us to be able to put on these events for you every month. These have been going on since 2008. So we've been around for a little while hosting these events. First up, we have the Raleigh SEO Conference. That is where we get the majority of our funding to have these events, and that's an event that comes around each May. Then we have Deep Crawl, Look to the Right, The Digital. I've got to update my notes here. I've accidentally got their past branding of The Design still in my notes. I need to change that to The Digital. Reunion Marketing, Wingswept, and Opsis. One more little announcement piece. I'm working on putting together a member directory. So I regularly get contacts from people that say, hey, I need help with XYZ project. Do you know anybody? And I do know a lot of people, but I don't necessarily know what everybody in the room or everybody in our group does. So if you fill out this little survey that I've put together for the member directory, it will help me to know what it is that you do, so that way I can hand off those leads to the appropriate person. Also, we like to invite people, especially our own members, up here to speak. So if you've ever had an inclination to give a presentation, make sure that you fill out this little member directory survey. And lastly, even if you don't want to speak and you're not interested in leads, if you have any interest in different topics that we have not covered or something that you would like to see us cover again, I have some questions in there asking for topic suggestions, so I make sure that we're covering the things that you want us to cover. That URL is bit.ly, bit.ly/2019. That should be easy to remember this year, 2019. All caps, SEO, and then all lowercase, meetup. So that's bit.ly/2019 SEO meetup. Without further ado, we have Jenny Halasz. Did I get that one right?
You did.
Hey, I've only been introducing her for 3 or 4 years now, so I'm starting to get the last name piece right as well. She is going to be talking with us about Google Analytics and Data Studio.
Thanks, Frank.
Oh, actually, you've got your own mic.
I've got the last. So. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Are you hearing me on the webcast? Excellent. Thank you, those of you who are on the webcast who've joined us. So let me see if I can get switched over to the presentation here. Frank, I might need your assistance with this.
I dragged the browser tab over to the far right of your screen there.
Got it.
Are we good? All right.
I believe so. Give me 1 second. It's not showing on here. Okay, hopefully that'll work. If it doesn't, we'll figure it out. So thank you everybody for coming out. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Data Studio. I always like to start out my talks with a little bit of a story. So this is me, and I really do love SEO. It's one of my favorite things. But maybe 6-7 years ago or so, the SEO field started to get really, really crowded. And I thought, well, I need to do something different with these pitches to speak, because there are a lot of SEO pitches out there, and I'm not winning as many pitches as I used to. So I thought, well, let me think about analytics a little bit more. And I started getting into analytics and digging into it a little bit in more detail, and I realized there were these great things called dashboards, where you could just kind of click a little pencil and things would show up. And so I went all around the world, actually, speaking on different ways of doing dashboards for Google Analytics. And then Google just pulled the rug right out from under me, because they stopped supporting dashboards. And I had a speaking gig coming up, and I needed to talk about something, and everybody was saying, well, everybody's going over to Data Studio, so maybe you want to go and take a look at that. And well, what do you know? I actually kind of fell in love, because dashboards are way cooler. Data Studio is way cooler than dashboards, because you have all of these different ways to bring data together and to look at cross-channel data, even within the same graphs. And so I wanted to show you all a little bit about how to do that tonight. But first, I like to start with kind of a survey. Who in the room is using Google Data Studio right now? Okay, I'm definitely going to try to give you all some tips that will hopefully be something a little bit extra that you can take away. Who has looked at Data Studio, maybe messed around with it a little bit, but hasn't actually implemented it? Okay. Who has never heard of Data Studio? Okay, awesome. And then of those of you who've never heard of Data Studio, how many of you are using Google Analytics? Okay. And if you're not using Google Analytics and you're using something else, you can still take a little bit away from this presentation because we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different ways of thinking about data and some of the corporate governance that goes into data and tagging, and maybe that you'll find that helpful for any analytics tool you're using. So, really big upgrade in terms of the capabilities of Data Studio. So what I want to go over is kind of explain to you why I think Data Studio is so great, talk through some of that corporate governance, then let's talk about how we can really set it up for success. And then I've got a few advanced tips for my friends in the audience that are already experts in the subject. Okay, so why would you use Data Studio? The first is that it's free. There are tons of great visualization tools out there, but they cost money, and Data Studio is free. The other thing is it's absolutely the best connection to Google data. You know what? Frank, is it possible to turn off a couple of the lights up here in the front? I'm noticing that this is a little washed out. There we go. Is that better? Okay. Good. All right. So thank you very much. We have all of these different products from Google, and there's tons more that I haven't listed here. But they connect to Data Studio, and so you can get that information kind of right from the horse's mouth, as we say, instead of trying to download it into a CSV or pull it from an API and manipulate it on your own and have to pay a developer to write up how to do the manipulations. So really good connection to Google data. New connectors are being built all of the time, and some of the newest ones that I've seen are Instagram, Fusion Tables, Reddit, Pinterest. Amazon's been there a while, CallRail. All of these products already have connectors to Data Studio. Now there are some that don't, and we'll talk about that. It's kind of frustrating that there are some that don't have connectors to Data Studio at this point, but most of the e-commerce and B2B products that you're using most likely connect with Data Studio already. When we're talking about corporate governance, there's a couple of things that you really have to keep in mind. And the first one is that you have to have a centralized tracking strategy. So everybody in the company has to be responsible for understanding how you're tracking things. What are your KPIs? What are your goals? How are you going to get there? And what tagging strategy are you using? What channels are you using? Because otherwise, as many of you in the room probably are very familiar with, you walk into an executive level meeting with a report and you say, we're doing great on sessions from Google and conversion rate on e-commerce and 3 other KPIs. And the executive at the end of the table says, oh, well, that's great, but we're tracking users and time on site and, and revenue. And you go, oh, I just did all this work and put together this impressive dashboard that helps nobody do their job better. So you really have to understand what it is that you're after and have that figured out on a corporate level. And then that tagging becomes super, super important. And a little hint for you, any of you using custom channels? None of you? Okay, I got 2 things that might blow your mind then. The first is anybody who has a Google My Business listing. Anybody have Google My Business listing? Yeah, a few of you? Any traffic that's coming in from that Google My Business listing is being counted as direct, unless you have it tagged otherwise. So there's one. Number 2, anybody running paid social campaigns? Any traffic that's coming in from paid social, if you do not have it tagged specifically as paid social and labeled for a custom channel named paid social, is getting lumped in with your organic social. Right? So use those custom channels. Make sure that you know exactly what data is coming in and what buckets it's going into. It's really, really important. And then use your segments to roll those channels up. So if you use custom segments in Google Analytics, make sure you create a couple that are designed to roll that data up into something useful. For example, if you wanted to do a chart in Data Studio that compared, say, paid social to organic social to direct traffic coming from another social channel that's not one that you're tracking specifically or advertising on specifically, you could do all of that, but if you use segments in analytics, if you set those up beforehand, then it becomes super, super easy to just kind of cut that piece of data out from Google Analytics and bring it over to Data Studio. So think about how you might want to slice and dice that data. And then attribution. Who in here is familiar with the fact that Google uses last click attribution? Okay, so the last thing that you click on is what Google the last channel that's clicked on is what Google gives credit for. So if I did a search on that lovely sweater that you're wearing, I really like that, by the way, on cardigan sweaters, and I found a cardigan sweater that I really liked, and then I got busy and I did I clicked through to a site, and Sweaters R Us, let's say, and I got busy and I left my computer and I came back later and I thought, oh, what was that? What was that site I looked at? Oh, I'm gonna look, it's in my history. So I go back in my history and I click on it, now it's a direct visit. And then later I'm doing something completely different and I see an ad for it on social because they're being really smart and using remarketing to cookie me and remarket that sweater to me, and I go, oh yeah, I was gonna buy that sweater, click buy. Who should get the credit for that? Should it be the organic team, the social team, the branding team? Or you could say, who cares, I got my money. But you see where that becomes kind of a quagmire of figuring things out, and everybody wants to take credit for that sale, right? With Google, if you use Google Analytics the way it's set up, and you don't go into one of the custom attribution modes, that last click, what did I say that last click was? Social ad. That last click is going to be the one that actually gets the credit for the sale. Anybody ever tried to compare Google AdWords data to Google Analytics and gone, why does this not match up? This is driving me crazy. Anybody in here familiar with that problem? Okay, there we go. We got a hand. Here's why. When Google delivers data from AdWords, in the AdWords interface, they use any click. If any click was paid, paid gets the credit. But in analytics, it has to be the last click that was paid for paid to get the credit. Make sense? Corporate governance. You got to solve these problems before they become problems. Some other things that you need to be aware of. Google Analytics is JavaScript-based tracking. There are different types of tracking. Google Analytics relies on a JavaScript tag to load in the browser to be able to capture that click. It's not web server logs or anything like that. So if the user has JavaScript turned off, or if they clear their cookies, or various other things that they can do, you may not get a click that you expected to get, and you may have somebody tagged as like a new user when they're actually a returning user. So just keep that in mind. There are some problems with the data, and there's really nothing we can do about that. You have to have buy-in. People have to be willing to tag things. You cannot have a situation where your social team goes out and builds an entire campaign for July 4th and doesn't tag any of it with the paid social tag. You will completely lose all your data. You can't go backwards. And then, like I said, those attribution models don't always match. So really, really, really sit down and have a conversation with the stakeholders within your organization about what are our goals going to be? How are we going to track them? How are we going to tag them? How are we going to communicate these tagging strategies? And then also consider the risks of sharing information, sharing access, understand what it is that people are going to have access to, because they're going to have access to revenue numbers and things like that. There's no customer identifiable data in Google Analytics. There's no, they call it PII. There's no personally identifiable information in Google Analytics. They purposely keep it out. So that can actually help a little bit in terms of those corporate governance problems with bigger companies, especially if you have to remain HIPAA compliant and that sort of thing. Okay, free template. You all can download it and play with it. It's very easy to use a Google Data Studio template. Just go to that link, and for anybody who can't see it easily, it is bit.ly, bit.ly / all lowercase JLH Data Studio.
Are you going to be sharing these entire slides with us?
I can. I absolutely can. Maybe Frank can email them out to the group or post them on the website or something.
They're also going live to the video.
That's right. They will also be on Facebook, right?
Do you have access to record it, or is it just live stream?
It's live streaming, and then it stays up there recorded on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Yes. Thank you. Some fun stuff. Regular expressions. Anybody here ever played with regular expressions? Yay! Some people that love that. Well, maybe don't love it as much as I do, but definitely have played with it. One of the coolest things about Data Studio that isn't well supported in Google Analytics and was not supported at all in dashboards is that it does support regular expressions. So you can do things like filter. And to do that, you would just click on an element, choose what the piece of it that you want to filter is. Let's say source. I've got a bunch of stuff in there that I don't necessarily want. I can click add a filter over here on 2. It's going to ask me to pick a filter. If I've already created one, I can apply it to this site as well, or I can click on that down there where it says create a filter. And then this is what I really love. I hope you all can see it in the back, is I could say, exclude a source where regular expression contains, and then I can use very basic regular expression of just that pipe bar to separate each of the items that I want to not have show up in my report. Really nice. If you've never used regular expressions before, or if you just need a refresher, I wrote an article on Search Engine Land. It's actually pretty old now, 2014, but regular expressions still are what they always have been. And that's at bit.ly regex for marketers. So I'll give you guys a minute if you want to write that down. Okay, visualization really matters. with Data Studio and with any reporting software. And the thing about it is you can have something, let's say we have clicks and we have site click-through rate. This is the way it comes through. If I just pull through Google Search Console and say, give me the clicks that I've had historically and the click-through rate, then this is the way it comes through. But you see this red line down here on the bottom, this is my site click-through rate, because my click-through rate is not ever going to be above, probably around 20-30% at most. So it's down there in that 0 range, whereas my clicks have to go all the way up to 800. Very easy to fix. Use the style feature on the side and select to put a right axis on there. This is the same kind of thing you would do in Excel if you were cleaning up an Excel report. Say show axis title, and in this case, I've actually had it use a custom value. So the default is going to be 0 to 1 most likely. This particular data, which incidentally is not one of my clients, it's Google sample data, has a really low click-through rate. So I chose to use a really small number there of 0.04. And then once you do that, then you get something more like this. And that's much more useful because you can see that this site has suffered from a significant drop in click-through rate over the last, couple of months. Something that then becomes actionable that you can go and investigate and find out, well, why is that happening? Align your design. Just kind of put things together. This is a little tip that a lot of people don't really realize is in Data Studio. I like to put things together, but I am not a designer. So just as this crooked title is uncomfortable, crooked boxes would be uncomfortable. So all you have to do to align it up is just select all the ones that you want, click align horizontally or align vertically, and then you can left, center, right, top, bottom, however you want to do it. Makes it look a lot nicer. And when you're in there trying to actually, align it to the tiny, I don't know if you can see the tiny little grid lines behind the screen there. When you're trying to align it to those tiny little grid lines, it can give you a headache. So just use that little trick. Google Data Studio has some problematic defaults on it. There's a problem with this chart. Can anybody tell me what it is? She's got it. The dates. This chart is going from May to March. Is that useful? No, that is not useful. We need it to go from March to May. By default, for some reason, all of your bar and line graphs in Data Studio show up backwards. I don't know why.
It's backwards. It's unsorted. There's a February right next adjacent to your May.
You're absolutely right. This one looks like it's sorted by sessions descending, maybe?
Possibly.
That's even more useless. Thank you for pointing that out. So it's actually an easy fix. Just click on the element you want to change and go into that Style tab again. Click that reverse x-axis direction, and that'll fix it. It's just a dumb thing that, for whatever reason, is weird. In this case, we'd actually have to reverse the axis direction and change what it's sorted by, because for some reason it's sorted by sessions instead of by date.
They also have the time series graphs.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't this be a case where that bottom one is not, it doesn't know it's a time, so it's just treating it all evenly.
It might,
So if you switch the graph to a time series,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
then it should put the dates in the correct order because now it knows that axis is dates.
Yes.
That's a weird difference between that and Excel, which doesn't do that.
Yes, it would. But actually, Data Studio allows you to select any one of the metrics that you're looking at and sort it by the metric. So you could do it by by any metric that you wanted to sort it by. So you could sort it by ascending or time series or date series or however you wanted to do it.
So this may be a non sequitur at this point, and maybe you should wait till later in the conversation, but there's a lot of people in business that use business analytics tools, Power BI and Tableau and other tools that are dynamic and access to companies' real-time data. Can you speak to the advantages of Data Studio working with Google Analytics data? And is there a way to export that, like comma separated values or something more complex that Pandas or Tableau or Power BI gets and integrates into their studio so that if people are familiar with those analytic tools in display, they can use those?
That's an excellent question. And for those of you on the webcast, he's asking essentially, and I'm going to try to paraphrase. If I get it wrong, let me know. He's asking essentially if there's an easy way to take data from Google Analytics and bring it into a more enterprise level tool like Power BI or Tableau. And the answer is yes, there is. There's a couple of different ways. You can either do CSV or XML exports, but probably the easiest way at that level and with the development staff that you likely have available at that level would be to integrate with the API. Definitely. From a search perspective, since we're SEOs, right, I like to use Google Analytics because, as I said before, it's kind of like getting the data right from the horse's mouth. That can be a challenge for sure if your company uses web trends or another enterprise level tracking system. Adobe is extremely popular, and that can definitely be challenging in terms of trying to take data from search and translate it into an enterprise tool like Power BI. You have all of the data there, but in terms of getting them to play well with one another, it can be quite a challenge. So I like to make sure, even if I have a client that is, let's say, on Adobe, I try to convince them to put analytics on there as well, because being able to marry analytics and Search Console, especially within Data Studio, is very helpful to me. As an SEO. But then, of course, you have to take the data out and figure out what's going on and then figure out how to show something similar in that enterprise tool. So there's another kind of irritating, problematic default that Google Data Studio has, and that's for some reason when you create a table, it always puts table numbers on it. And they're not even useful table numbers because the very first one is the total. So I don't know why they do that, but again, it's, click into style, uncheck row numbers, and that'll fix it. There is a new sort feature, as I mentioned. You can sort by any metric, ascending or descending, and that can make that a lot more useful instead of these random times that it's showing right now. Okay, I already talked to one person in this room that has this problem. Anybody had a situation where they inherited an analytics account that has 3 or 4 different profiles or 3 or 4 different accounts in it because every time they went to a new hosting platform or did a redesign, they thought they needed all new analytics? Yep, anybody dealt with that? I've definitely dealt with that. Blended data is a beautiful solution for that. Blended data can be used for a lot of different things. Essentially what it does is it takes disparate elements and combines them based on what's called a join key, which is essentially just one piece of data that is the same. So you could do it where the join key was the keyword or the date or the page. You can choose anything that you want for the join key, and that makes it way easier to pull data together. With blended data, let's say I have one where I've got 2018 revenue and users in one account and 2017 revenue and users in a different account. And I want to pull it all in together and compare it to, say, 2019. Blended data is a great way to do this. If you go to Resource and click Manage Blended Data, then you're going to have the opportunity to add a data view. From there, you'll select your two different pieces of data that you're bringing together. And you want to make sure that this join key is going to be the same for each of them. If you do it by month of the year, if you want to look at year-over-year data, compare 2017 to 2018. It's a very simplistic example, but I think it helps to make it simple. Then that is what you would use as your join key, is the month of the year. But, this is a really big but, you'll bring in your dimensions and metrics. Standard, Google's going to call them users and revenue. But, if you do not relabel these specific to each data source, so you have 2018 users and 2017 users, and the same thing with revenue, then what you are going to get is a chart that doesn't distinguish. It's going to say users, users, revenue, revenue. And now that's not helpful, right? The other big challenge with that is that with blended data, you can't edit it after you blend it. So you're going to run into this, I guarantee you, when you start playing with it, you're going to run into this. Just think of label, label, label everything that you can, and it'll make your life so much easier. So rename your dimensions and metrics so that you know what source they came from. And then when you come into Data Studio and you want to actually create a chart out of this, what you're going to do is choose your organic traffic segment on both, because in this case we want organic traffic. Now we might have created a segment for paid social and want paid social traffic or email or whatever we have. And then I'm going to call one this year and one last year. Then when we pull it together, we're going to name it something. In this case, I named it Blended Analytics Data Year Over Year. Seemed like pretty clear. And then you're going to have your month of the year as your time dimension, because that's your join key, remember? And then your metrics are going to be exactly the same as the blended data that you brought in. Now again, as I said, unfortunately at this point in time, you cannot filter or change dates on this after you bring the data in. You will have to start over with a new data source, which is frustrating. And then when you do that, it's going to show you the metrics as you entered them. So as I said, 2018 users, 2018 revenue, 2017 users, 2017 revenue, right? In this case, the data is going to be incomplete because when this chart was created, they didn't have October through December yet. That data just didn't exist yet. And then you're definitely going to want to create a secondary axis when you're comparing revenue and users, because hopefully you don't have the same amount of revenue as you have of users, because then all of your sales are only worth $1. There are some problems with Data Studio. I put these up every time I speak on Data Studio, and fortunately, occasionally I get to cross things off. So Google has fixed these top 3 things, but it still doesn't connect natively with SEO tools like Search Metrics and SEMrush. There are a number of fairly high quality companies out there where you can pay for access and they will use their APIs to pull that data in for you. But I have had varying success on those. And I have found especially that when you have a higher volume data set, there seem to be holes when you bring that data in. So that's a little bit frustrating. The GSC, the Google Search Console connector, is still only limited to URL and query data. And for me as an SEO, like it would be great to have a chart of the 404s or the, number of pages with schema errors or whatever, all of those pieces of information unfortunately don't come through in Data Studio yet, although I've been told by people who should know that it's coming. What I was told is that they wanted to finish rolling out the new Google Search Console before they went back and pulled in more data through the connector. And then the blended data is just too limited because you can't edit it, because you can't pull together on multiple join keys. It's just too limited at this time. It's really only useful for a handful of specific use cases. There are some new features that have come out for Data Studio just in the last couple of months. You can now schedule it to email you reports, which is very nice. You can check your version history, so if somebody goes in there and screws up what you built, you can put it back to a prior version or see what they changed. You can save the current view that you're on so that you can send somebody a link and it will bring them to that current view, which is nice if you're doing reports for, say you're doing reports for somebody who really doesn't understand analytics very well, and you send them a report that is for the month of June, but they don't open it until July 15th. Well, then the Data Studio would have already changed the default view to be July 1st through 15th instead of June 1st through 30th, which is going to be problematic because you're going to get a call that says, why is our revenue down 40%? Well, because we've only had 40% of the month so far, sir. So that's something. And then the last thing is custom rolling date ranges. And this is really, really cool. But it's also pretty complex. So what I did instead of trying to actually, might need some help with this, I'm not sure. What I did instead of trying to talk through it is to make a video. No, let's see here. Yeah, Frank, I think I'm going to need some assistance here. Oh, wait, I might have just figured it out. Won't let me do it from here.
That all set up.
Okay, great.
View. And then once that disappears there, you can see that now you can select this date picker. So it's going to always default to the last full month that we have data for. And that way it's going to show you the date range year over year. And it's going to update every time. So if we look at this tomorrow and it's June 1st, it's going to update and it's going to show May because that's the last full month that we have data for. But then you can also do what's called a rolling date range, where you can come in here and you can do last month, or you can scroll down to advanced. And so I'm going to go back to the edit screen to show you how to do this. There we go, go back to the edit screen. And then when you're on here and you've got your default date ranges last month, instead select advanced. And now this is going to give you the ability to do like today minus a certain number of months. So let's say, for example, I wanted to show for the year so far compared to the previous year. So instead of choosing today, I would choose a fixed date and fix this at January 1st. And then for this one, we're going to do today, which happens to be the 31st, minus 1 month. And that's going to give us, again, like the most recent thing that we have data for. Or you could do minus 2 months, or you could do it on a quarterly basis, however you want to do it. And then click apply, and what it's going to do is it's now going to update that way. And so every time your client comes in to look at the report, when they're looking at view, it's going to show the last date, the last month that we have full data for.
But as a year-to-date metric. And it occurred to me after I made this video that you could just use, there's actually a year-to-date option. But if you, say, for example, had a fiscal year that went July to June instead of January to December, then you could create a year-to-date based on your fiscal year as opposed to your calendar year. And that could potentially be really helpful. Or as I said in the video, you could do it quarterly. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility to be able to choose your date ranges that we never really had in even Google Analytics before. So I think it's pretty cool. So as you're preparing for Data Studio, really deal with those governance problems. You know, make sure you know your goals, what your conversions are, make sure your data's clean, that you're actually tracking everything, that your tracking pixel is on all of your pages, things like that, and determine what those ideal visualizations are going to be. So it can be really helpful to use something like Excel to just mock up a really quick visual and say to your boss, you know, are you okay with this in a line graph, or would you rather see a pie chart? You know, and that way you're not going in and reinventing the wheel when you get into Data Studio to actually build it. And along those lines as well, Data Studio does make it pretty easy to switch between chart styles as long as you're bringing in the same data points. So it's easy to make little adjustments as you go, as long as you're not dealing with blended data. But otherwise, it's pretty easy. So solve your governance problems first. Label everything. Label, 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 label. Especially if you use multiple clients. Like I have, you know, multiple clients within the same Data Studio account. You definitely want to label things as, you know, company name, organic, that sort of thing. Otherwise, you get into situations where you're trying to pick from a list of segments and they all say organic traffic, and you're like, oh, which one is organic traffic for XYZ company? I don't actually know. So label. And then keep experimenting with it, because there's a lot more that you can do that I haven't even touched on here. And there's also an email from Google Analytics that you can sign up for, and they will send you each month in an email what's new and exciting with Data Studio and Google Analytics. I don't have a link for that, but you can just go to analytics.google.com or datastudio.google.com, and they have sign-up links for those emails on both of those pages. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have, because that was probably a lot to throw at you.
Hey, Gene.
Gotten deep into it.
Can you, yeah, please speak into the mic.
I'm one of the people who has messed around, not gotten deep into it. Does it have anything other than graphs, such as, for instance, I'm in location intelligence, maps? So when I look at data that sails across the United States, it's worthless. If I can't break it into geographic segments, I end up in Tableau or something else pretty quickly.
Yeah, you can actually use geographic segmenting. You can use geographic maps. Google Data Studio also has native within it access to a number of different public sources of information. So you can even pull in, say, something like population by DMA compared to sales or something like that. Sometimes that information can be useful as well. So it definitely does have that capability. Typically requires somebody with a little bit more design cred than I have. Questions? Yeah.
So I'm helping our email marketing specialist set up some graphs to pull in. Thank you. To pull in some data from a platform that does not have a connector yet for Google Data Studio, and I was wondering, can I pull that data into like a spreadsheet and then blend that data with Google Analytics? Because I think I was onto something, but I wasn't sure.
Probably the easiest way to do it is going to be to pull that data into Google Sheets, and then Google Sheets has a connector to Data Studio.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, did the gentleman right in front of you have a question? No?
So you still use Search Console, right?
Yes.
And this is just a way to visualize what's in Analytics and Search Console
Together.
together.
So when you look at like I was helping this gentleman get his Search Console connected to Analytics. When you look at that data, all it does is bring the same thing from Search Console into Analytics, and it doesn't actually marry it with any of the information. But with Data Studio, you can pull that data in and use like URL to connect between the URL that Google shows as having gotten the traffic and the URL in Analytics, so that you can look at it and see, say, how many impressions were there on this URL compared to the number of clicks that we actually got, as opposed to the number of clicks that Google recorded. So there's some really nice stuff that you can do there in terms of taking that Search Console data and expanding the scope of it.
And I have another question that is more SEO related, if that's okay.
Sure.
So
As I said, I love SEO.
I have a client who's got a very old website. It's like circa 2010. And it's not mobile friendly at all. Like if you look at it on a phone, you would have to expand it to see it. And yet I'm not advising to move into a mobile because I'm scared of losing the juice, because there's a lot of history. And so is there someone you could recommend offline, or a strategy to make sure that we don't mess with the SEO, don't mess with the history of the site, and still make it mobile friendly?
I mean, there's a couple of different histories you're talking about here. So there's the link history, which, as we know, for SEO is very important. So you can mitigate that just by making sure that everything is redirected from the old site to the new site. Is it an MDOT, or is it just an old site that needs to be replatformed?
It's a WordPress site that has, I think with a new theme that's mobile friendly, could be easily updated.
Okay.
But there's tons and tons of blogs and content, and it's links and Facebook plugins, and I don't even know where to start with. And I'm kind of scared of the SEO going haywire.
Okay, so definitely, just retheming something is easier than bringing in like MDOT and www. Where you had a separate mobile site for the main site and all of that. So replatforming on a mobile responsive theme shouldn't really be that big of a deal. But you will want to make sure that any file names that you change get redirected. And then for analytics, just keep it the same. Just keep it the same. Don't change your analytics. I think that's something that people don't realize they can do. You can keep the exact same account, the exact same profile, and just change the URL. Or in your case, if it's the same top level domain, then no change is even necessary. But just keep it as consistent as you can, and that should help you mitigate any kind of issues with Google Organic. And I do have a referral for you. Did you want to say something?
I was going to ask, what about AMP pages for what she's doing? Do you recommend AMP pages for a situation like that, or would you just go ahead and move to a responsive theme?
So AMP pages add a whole extra level of complication to everything. When you use, and I'll answer it from the analytics standpoint first. When you use AMP pages, you typically have to do what is called session stitching in Google Analytics, which means that you actually have to create a custom dimension that can put those pages together, so that you don't end up with all of your AMP pages having separate values from all of your main pages. So that can be really challenging from that perspective. From an SEO perspective, AMP will likely get you in the carousel of articles. So from that standpoint, it can be very helpful for SEO, or if you have a main site that's really slow, it can be really helpful for SEO. But I have seen a lot of customers that have bigger issues on their site that they need to solve first. And they have queries that don't produce AMP results. So if the query doesn't produce an AMP result, then you can certainly make an AMP page. There's no harm in that whatsoever, but you probably won't get the same benefit from it. So really consider that in terms of that question. Yeah.
As an outsider to web development and web usage and SEO and everything, I'm really a programmer and developer of applications. But from what I understand from the development of websites with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, it sounds to me like your problem isn't content and SEO, it's UX, and shouldn't that be handled by CSS and extended CSSs that dynamically interact with JavaScript and pull the right CSS for the mobile platform that you're looking at, so that you just keep the same site and you don't mess with any of the links or any of the analytics. You keep the same content, you just render it for the device properly.
That is a great question.
I don't know why.
Do I have any other developers in the room?
Well, that's basically
Okay.
what you're saying with
Yeah, that is essentially what a WordPress responsive theme does.
One thing I'll say is make sure that you do it. If you're going to do some major changes, go to sandbox of the website first and test it offline first. Otherwise, you'll regret it.
That's an excellent point. So for those of you on our webcast, we just had an audience member say that it's very important to make sure that you create a sandbox or a testing site before you just change your main site to make sure everything works first. And that's an excellent point.
So I'll admit we have not updated our conversion tracking since changing our website onto a totally different platform. So our conversion tracking is totally borked. I've been tracking it in HubSpot, which is where we moved our site to. But obviously I would like to take advantage of blending the data all in Google with AdWords and Search Console. What are your suggestions for unborking messed up conversion data and sort of resetting?
Unborking it, I like that.
Try and keep it clean.
So there's a couple different ways you could go with it. You could fix the borked tracking in analytics so that it's tracking conversions properly. Or you could take the HubSpot data and use something like URL or session, I don't know if you could use a session ID, maybe something like that to stitch that data together. Obviously HubSpot is going to provide their reports, so I don't know offhand if they have a Data Studio connector, but whether they do or not.
I haven't used it.
They do have one?
A paid one, yeah. But
Okay. So that could be an option in terms of just bringing that data in and creating a blended data source where the join key is the URL maybe. That's an option. Good question. A lot of good questions.
Can I ask the second one?
I'll be right over there with the mic.
Okay, yeah, we'll pass the mic in. That makes sense.
If you're in a data studio viewing a data and dashboard, I mean, if the data is sampled that's coming in from GA, it does an indicator at the bottom, which is very easy to miss. And you can click that and get a nice yellow box around the thing that is sampled. Unless it has blended data, then it doesn't know. But there's no way at this time to get any indication in the emailed PDFs that something is sampled. Is that correct?
You're 100% right on that. It's definitely something that I know that the Google Data Studio team is aware of and is working on, but it's something that if it weren't so hard to explain, I would have on that list.
Well, it's a problem they've had ever since dashboards.
Yeah,
Dashboards
it is.
did the
It's a
same
very
thing.
common problem. And if any of you aren't familiar with what sample data means, what he's referring to, a lot of times, you remember at the very beginning of the presentation, I said Google won't allow any personally identifiable information to come in. Well, if you ever have a series of dimensions and metrics or a segment built that brings the data down to a point where Google feels like that it's possible to find out who specifically took this action or to follow a specific user path, then they will not let you see it, and they will sample it. And that is something, that is a problem when it comes to looking at your data. You need to know whether it's sampled or not, so you know if you're looking at fairly accurate data or not. Another problem comes in if you go above the threshold for Google Analytics free. So if you have more than, I think it's 1 million page views a month, then that will get sampled down as well, so that they can still give you data, but they won't be able to track all of your page views.
Yeah, the bigger problem is when you're using segments.
Mm-hmm.
Segments tend to kick in the sampling a lot lower level than just your regular metrics.
Definitely, and what I
The reason you're doing the dashboards is the segments.
absolutely, and what I typically recommend to people is to play with the segments, to try to make sure in Google Analytics that the segments are not frequently bringing up the sample data rule, because if they are, then you know your data is going to be borked.
I like that word.
I do too.
So, how does Tag Manager play with all of this? I didn't know if I should ask.
It's a whole extra level of complication. Google Tag Manager. So Google Tag Manager, for those of you who are not aware, it was designed as a way for people with limited development resources or limited access to development resources to be able to change tags and change tracking without having to actually mess with the underlying code of the site. And so what that's used for is there's essentially a container, and within that container you can put any tags that you want to track. So once you get your development team to put that container on your page, then you have the ability through the Google Tag Manager tool to be able to put tags in and take tags out at will. It is strictly for tagging, so the Tag Manager works very similarly to, well, identically in fact, to Google Analytics tagging. It just essentially puts an intermediary in there so that you put the tags in the Tag Manager, and then the Tag Manager talks to Analytics and says, okay, for this information that you got, this is the information we want out of it. And so that's kind of how that works. And then you can also use Tag Manager for all kinds of more complex things. A lot of people use it for schema tagging and the like, and so that can get very complicated very quickly. Not to mention the fact that I personally think Tag Manager is one of the most user-unfriendly interfaces I've ever encountered. I try to avoid it at all costs. Other questions? Okay.
All right, Jenny, thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. And if anybody has other questions they didn't want to ask in front of the group, or if anybody on the webcast has questions, feel free to hit me up either in the next few minutes, or if you're on the webcast, I'm on Twitter. Just Google my name and send me a Twitter message, and I'll see what I can do for you.